Alabama and Tennessee set to face off in the annual third Saturday in October showdown. We're going to get into the injury report for the Crimson Tide. How healthy are they? Taking a look particularly at the wide receiver position, but also some other spots as well. And this matchup, what does it mean? What is Alabama trending towards as they head into this game against the Volunteers on the road somehow as a favorite? We're going to talk about that and more right here on Cover Crimson. All right, there he is, Clint Lamb himself. Mick Gillispie, thanks for hanging out with us on Cover Crimson. Brought to you by mybookie.ag, promo code next round to double your initial deposit. All right, before we talk about the 2.5 point spread in this game and start to really match it up, let's get to the injury report. What do you got?
Well, before we do that, I just want to very quickly, just while we're talking, have you ever thought about while we're on air, when we go click that intro and we got like 10 seconds, if we just very quickly changed our attire, like if we on a different shirt, a different hat, sat back down, like nothing was, you think anybody would notice?
We should do that. Dude, we're going to tell everybody, choreographic, I'm in for this.
I don't know if I could do it that quickly, but I would. I mean, you might get me half naked in here, trying to put a shirt on when it comes back up, but I think that would be fun just to see if people notice.
But I like our intro, by the way. The elephant in the room intro is terrible. that was pretty good.
Yeah, I love ours. Yeah, ours is great. As far as injuries, though, Alabama's got a lot that has been going on with them. Yhonzae Pierre, he's a guy that's been getting, some snaps, been a part of the rotation. But he posted a story to his Instagram last week before undergoing surgery that said something, I think, to the extent of, just a minor setback for a major comeback. And Kalen DeBoer did update on him and said that, he would still be probably up in the air right now. Said he was somewhere between probable and questionable. So, if he's able to play, I think that'll be great, especially against this style of Tennessee defense. I think situationally, he can make an impact. Now, Tennessee's going to want to run the football. And, if you look at what Florida did last week, as far as, Nick Saban, or not Nick Saban, I'm still doing it. Kalen DeBoer was asked about dime defense. And, the fact that Arkansas utilized that to kind of hold Tennessee's offense to 14 points. Florida didn't do that. Florida loaded guys in the box. They said, we're going to stop the run and we're going to pressure Nico. And we're going to see if he can beat us vertically. And Tennessee was not able to do that. So I think that Alabama, more than likely, based off of what Kane Womack has said, he'll probably take a similar approach. But Yhonzae Pierre and just what he brings to the table as far as being a pass rusher, I think situationally he could end up making an impact in this game if he's going to be available. But we'll have to wait and see on that. But more importantly, Mick, it's the two receivers. It's Kobe Prentice and it's Kendrick Law. And, of course, they've missed, one of them went out in the Georgia game. One of them went out against Vanderbilt. Both of them missed against South Carolina, even though they were trending towards playing. I think they're probably going to be available. Kalen DeBoer says that, they feel better and better about it each and every day that passes. And, I think that's really important because I don't think we understand just how big Kendrick Law has been for this Alabama offense.
Well, hopefully going into this game, we'll have Kendrick Law. And I didn't realize the impact that Law made. I kept saying, hey, you know what? We don't want a blocker. We want a receiver, receive the ball. But then when he was gone, you could really see the impact on the blocking and on the other things that go along with it. I felt like we finally started to utilize him in that Georgia game, his speed, and try to get him in there. And then he got hurt. So this Tennessee matchup is one where Alabama could use all the weapons that they have. Even if it's just to free Ryan Williams up, who's second right now in the SEC in receiving yards. Who would have ever thought that, by the way?
Yeah. I mean, and I will say this, with Kendrick Law, I think, you talk about his blocking. I don't think people understand how impactful that is out there on the perimeter. I was doing some research for the snap count observations because, on the surface, I'm not going to be telling anybody anything that they don't know. But when you actually start hearing the numbers, you realize just how drastically different it actually is. And that is with Kendrick Law in the lineup with Jalen Milrose running compared to when he's not in the lineup. And because 90% of what Milrose is going to be doing as far as when it's a design quarterback run is, it's going to be out there on the perimeter. It's getting him outside, using his speed, attacking space and doing all that. And so Kendrick Law and those receivers and their ability to block going to make a major impact. But I wanted to, share some of these numbers. So in the games where Kendrick Law played, which I included the Georgia, even though I think there's about a half that was not included. But he had Jalen Milroe, had 52 carries for 273 yards, which is a 5.3 yard per carry average, and 8 touchdowns. Without Kendrick Law in the lineup, Jalen Milroe has had 25 carries for 46 yards, which is only a 1.8 yard per carry average, and 3 rushing touchdowns. So, I think that is a perfect representation of what Kendrick Law brings to the table. If he can take care of at least one guy out there on the perimeter, and you start getting some isolated one-on-one matchups with Jalen Milroe, he's going to be able to exploit that, and he's going to be able to take what should be minimal, to decent gains and turn them into long gains. And I think that's something that we've been missing as far as seeing from this Alabama the last couple of weeks.
So when you do the snap count observations and you look at this Alabama team, somehow favorite in this game, which is, I'm like, what's Vegas really know? I mean, now they know a lot, right? So how the hell do they do it every game? But I mean, to me, I've always felt like you take the home dog. I mean, this is such an even matchup in my mind. But looking back at Alabama and all the research that you do going in, from game to game, what are your feelings on this offense, and how do you think they attack Tennessee's defense?
Well, that is really interesting. I think you have to be able, if you're going to be on the road in Neyland Stadium against that defense, you have to be able to bring more of a complementary style than we've seen from a run game, passing game perspective. And it can't just be Milroe. Obviously, we've already mentioned if Kendrick Law's back available, that's certainly going to help as far as your perimeter blocking and being able to do some of that stuff. But I think your traditional rushing attack, I don't know what opportunities Tennessee is going to provide as far as that interior run. But what I will say is that when you talk about Jalen Milroe's arm, I think any team that plays Alabama is going to respect it. I also think they're going to respect his legs. Even if he's had a couple of bad games, every defense that he plays is going to respect the fact that he can make a game-breaking, game-changing play with his legs. No doubt about it. And considering that so much of the defense's focus are on those two aspects, it's kind of, strange to me that they haven't been able to get the traditional run game going. But I think you have to in this, type of game, with the fact that Milroe has been struggling a little bit. Some of it's fluky. I think the Georgia interception down near the goal line, that was not a bad pass. If you look at where the defender was, he had to kind of throw it behind him a little bit. It just bounced up, or the way that the receiver, turned and it kind of swung up right into the Georgia defender's hands. You talk about the pick six against Vanderbilt. He was a little bit late on that, but 9 times out of 10, it's a batted pass. That one ended up just popping up right into the air and right into the hands of a Vandy defender. You talk about, I really don't think it was on him, that Elijah Pritchett pressure, strip sack against Vanderbilt. So, we talk about how much he's been turning the football over. But some of it's fluky, some of it's not his fault. But either way, you have to avoid giving Tennessee extra possessions in this type of game. Their offense has not been dynamic, but at any point in time, they can score the football. Josh Heupel's going to have some things dialed up and ready to go for this game. I also think Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack are both going to have some things dialed up as well. That's not just in one direction, but they've got to be able to run the football more effectively with their running backs than they have up to this point. I think that's going to make a major difference. If they can do that and they can get Kendrick Law back out there, hit Tennessee on some perimeter stuff, I think the entire offense is going to open up again. And based off of what we've seen from Tennessee's offense so far this year, if this gets into a situation where Alabama's scoring maybe more than people think, I don't know that Tennessee's offense will be able to keep up.
Right. I think that's where Alabama could really benefit if they go in and try to jump out in front early. But if the other thing happens and Tennessee's in one of those games that's either really close or they get the lead, do you think Alabama would have trouble stopping the Tennessee running attack?
Well, and that's why I think that everybody looks at Tennessee. They're going to think about Nico and just all the talent that he brings to the table. You're going to think about Josh Heupel and the fact that he likes to spread things out. And you're going to say, okay, I mean, the big threat here is the passing game, and it couldn't be more the opposite. Now, I will say, Florida did load the box up, and I say load the box up. They committed to stopping the run. You know, that wasn't stacking 8-man boxes over and over, but they made a concerted effort to limit Tennessee's run game and force them to play off of that, while also, because you've got, you know, more bodies up there near the box and you're making that sort of effort, you're putting Tennessee in unfavorable situations as far as down and distance, and you're applying pressure on Nico and making him make quick reads or tough decisions. And I think Alabama is going to do the same. But what I will say is something that we really didn't see a whole lot from Tennessee, and we haven't seen it consistently enough this year, are those vertical shots. They didn't really make Florida pay for some of that. And I think, A, they would have probably learned their lesson on that front, and B, there's no way you look at Alabama's defense and the way that other teams have been able to test Alabama deep, whether they've been able to capitalize on it or not, is not really relevant. The fact that those opportunities have been there, I mean, that is what Shane Beamer said after the game, from South Carolina. They looked at Alabama's secondary and they said, we have opportunities here. We're going to take some shots. There's no doubt in my mind that Tennessee is going to do the same. Don't be shocked if they hit on one or two of those. And those one or two could end up making a huge difference in the game, but expect it because this is still a growing secondary. But I think as far as what you saw Alabama do against Georgia, as far as presenting different pictures for Carson Beck pre and post snap, I think they're going to do some of that, really try to get Nico confused. He's a really young player, still growing. And then also they're going to apply pressure on him. I think they're going to be aggressive. They're going to take some risk. And I think they could end up forcing some turnovers. So even though I think Tennessee is a really good team and they could absolutely win this game, I'm not, the more I've watched or paid attention this week, the more I come away thinking, okay, I'm not overly shocked that Alabama's a favorite. And I could actually see Alabama handling this game and getting a fairly big victory if they can do some of those things. That doesn't mean that I'm saying it's going to work out that way, but if they can apply pressure on Nico and force the game more onto his shoulders, I really, and Jalen Milroe can avoid turnovers, really the entire offense, but just Milroe touching the football every play. If they can do those two things and avoid major penalties, I mean, I really like Alabama's chances to win this game.
Yeah, I think that Dylan Sampson, being able to contain him, the running back, is like such a big deal. Squirrel White's going to get his catches. I mean, his name's Squirrel. I mean, of course he's going to get a nut, but he can catch, man. He can.
I love that.
How about we've talked about this. I still think that catch he made last year in Tuscaloosa was absolutely amazing. It might have been one of the most amazing catches of the year. But those are the two guys. It's not like there's, when we lost to those guys there 2 years ago, it felt like there was like 3 or 4 guys that were catching a lot of balls, right? That it just kind of this year, it's like him and
Brew
then
McCoy.
Yeah, and well, then Brett, what is that guy's name? Brazil or whatever.
Brazil.
Yeah, that's it. Like that guy will make some plays, but it's all Squirrel White and then Dylan Sampson to me.
Yeah, and just we'll be talking about this more. I'm going to be doing kind of a preview look with Stacy a little bit later today. I think that's going to come out in the morning probably. But just to give a kind of preview, Tennessee, they're going to spend most of their time, I mean, roughly about 70% of the time in 11 personnel. They're going to kind of live out of that, but they're going to do different things. They're going to spread you out more. The splits from the receivers, and like Kane Womack has mentioned, and Nick Saban's mentioned it a ton, they do that to create opportunities both in their vertical passing game as far as stacking receivers, and then also in their run game. And so that's something to keep an eye on. They will also go 12 personnel, but it's mostly going to be 11. Very RPO heavy offense. I want to say it's like 32% of the time, which is way above average. Big play action offense. They don't really utilize motion a lot, which I'm surprised. Like with a young quarterback, you would think they would as far as trying to, identify man coverage versus zone, make as much easy pre-snap for Nico as possible. That you really don't see them doing that a lot. But, they rarely have to play against heavy boxes because of the style of offense that they play. But when they have had to do it, that's kind of limited their success. And I think that there was a lot that Tennessee left on the table against Florida. I don't think Florida didn't shut down that offense quite like people think that they did, even though they still did a really, really good job. I don't necessarily think that it's about completely shutting that offense down. I think if you can do the right things offensively, you can stay ahead of the sticks. You can get your playmakers involved, getting Kendrick Law back. We've already talked about that impact, getting your traditional run game going. I think you can score enough where Tennessee can't match you like they probably will need to. And their defense is going to get some stops, and that crowd's going to be rowdy. So I'm not saying Alabama's scoring every time they touch the football. I just think, with when I'm looking at from a matchup standpoint, I wouldn't be shocked at all if Alabama can create more as far as consistency with the drives than maybe Tennessee, even though Alabama's had a problem with that up to this point. And so there's a lot that needs to break their way in order for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. We'll see. Last time Bama was there, they struggled with the noise. They had a lot of penalties. I thought the officiating was awful. And I'm sure Tennessee fans thought it was great. It's amongst the worst officiated game I've ever seen. But you know what? People say that about us too. Hey man, we got, we played Alabama. We didn't get the calls. And with that, Saban and Pat Summitt had this thing. They could stare at the officials and they would be like, yeah, they're right. It's like they were I agree with this guy. No, I don't know. I mean, I don't care if they go in there and lose. I just hope that when the game's over, it's not that like last time where you just felt like the officials gave the game to Tennessee. I thought that the Kool-Aid interception, the guy in the very back corner of the end zone on a jump ball on 4th down, calling a pass interference was just shady as you know what. And but you get into those environments, it's loud. How intimidated is Alabama going to be? How, are they going to be able to execute snaps? Are they going to be able to stay on sides? Are they going to do the little things right that it takes to win these type of games? But I will say this, Saban was always so dangerous with his teams when they lose, because I think everybody would just expect that Alabama was going to come in and play poorly, like they're trending that way. And then all of a sudden it would be like they would just trend the total different direction and come in and play their best football. I wonder if Kalen DeBoer can pull that same magic.
That is a really good question. And, it was interesting. I saw someone on Twitter earlier. I think Greg McElroy is the one that brought this up initially. But, his point was everybody wants to talk about Nick Saban and the fact that after a loss, how they would kick the mess out of somebody. And, Greg McElroy pointed out that they were 8-14 against the spread following a loss under Nick Saban, which, I didn't really understand. I think it was the simple approach just because you can go easily look, see what their record is against the spread. But I actually went back through and looked at every single loss, and I shared this on Twitter. But what I did was I pulled out, if it was a loss, if it was the game after a loss, like if it was a bowl game, if you're playing Utah or you're playing Clemson after they lost to Auburn one year and still made it to the college football playoff, I think 2017. If it was, I'm trying to think of some, Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl as well. If it was a long layoff between losses, I removed that. I removed, non-Power 5 opponents because I just think, there were, that helps Alabama as far as the USF game, but then you've got like Western Carolina. You've got a bunch of games where they just blew that next team out, 42-0 or 55-0 or whatever. So I was just like, okay, let's remove that. Let's make it as comparable to going from Vanderbilt, an SEC team, to South Carolina, an SEC team. And I found 8 that fit the criteria. And it was, Nick Saban in those games, they went 8-0 in those games, and the point differential was plus 19 for Alabama. So they normally did handle business. They didn't always cover the spread. Vegas might have had them as a bigger favorite, but they still were able to. They still managed to win, by a pretty large margin. That was not every time. The one that people were going to talk about is 2014 with Arkansas following the loss to Ole Miss, 14-13 final. So it wasn't like Nick Saban was above, his team struggling after a loss, but I did find that rather interesting compared to, an 8-14 against the spread type of picture.
Right. Well, it's not like Nick Saban really cared about the spread.
Yeah.
About winning games, but Greg's been right on this. I've I love to talk about stuff that Greg talks about because, you know, he shoots from the hip, you know, so
He does.
there's always something to talk about. But I I was totally wrong about Alabama being hung over going into the Indy game. Vandy's better than I thought, and Alabama hasn't been as good as I thought they were, you know, and at the end of the day, he was right about that one. I still hold out hope that this is going to be the game that everything clicks like what we saw first half against Georgia. And one thing I will tell you is these guys are not afraid to pull a game plan, you know, right out of their backside like they did against Georgia. So these are the games at Alabama you got to win. You got to win Tennessee, you got to win Auburn, and we love to beat LSU too.
Well, and Georgia, this is the first opportunity. You know, I think that after what happened against Vanderbilt, the coaching staff learned you got to take every opponent seriously. You got a game plan for it. You're not going to out talent anybody. You got to put in the work each and every week in this league. And so, you know, I'm not saying that they didn't have a game plan specifically for South Carolina. They absolutely did. I actually think they did a pretty good job for the most part executing that. I think they made some boneheaded decisions at the end of both halves. I think turnovers, really played a part in it. But you know, when you look at what Alabama, the one game where it's like, man, this is a big one and it's a toss up. We don't know going in. I mean, Vegas doesn't know necessarily who's going to win going into it. Alabama came out with a very solid, well executed game plan on both sides of the football. And you saw that falter in the second half. I've, made my comments about that. I do think that they pulled back a little bit. We'll find out this weekend. It is a very different environment being in Bryant-Denny Stadium and having that crowd at your back, an electric crowd, an electric atmosphere compared to going in a Neyland Stadium where everything's against you. It's the exact opposite. I think that actually, when you talk about sides of the football, I think that helps Alabama's defense because against Georgia, I mean, when the crowd's going crazy, when Georgia's on offense, that affects your defense too, their communication. But in this game, it's going to be the offense that's going to be dealing with that. So the defense, as far as communication and all those things, there shouldn't be any issues on that front. But let's see what happens as far as what the game plan is, the wrinkles they throw in, and how is it executed. And then if they are able to execute it, can they execute it for two halves? That'll be the other thing I'll be interested to see. Not guaranteeing that that's going to happen, but I just want to see, is this sort of a situation where they play down to their opponents sometimes, whether that's good or bad. Certainly, in my opinion, it's bad. But or at least you can rely on in these big games, they bring it and they're ready to rock and roll. Doesn't mean they'll win necessarily, but at least they give themselves a chance in these big games.
It's one of the big games that we play every year. Bama's won 16-17, but this one feels like it's, you're talking about teams that are right here. It used to be kind of here.
It did.
Back to here again. So home field advantage could be a part of this, but if Alabama does the things that they're capable of doing, I'm confident that they'll come out of there smoking cigars. Anything else that you want to get into today, Clint?
No, I did want to get your thoughts. I mean, did you see what Travis Hunter said about his Heisman campaign? She was asked about it, but the Boise State running back, he was asked to kind of pitch himself as what differentiates him from others. And he's talking about that, Genty or whatever, however you say his name, the running back for Boise. And he was like, I mean, if I got, he's got 95 carries for 1,000 yards already. If I had 95 catches, how many yards do you think I would have? And I just thought that was, there's a lot of arguments for Travis Hunter to be in the Heisman conversation. If I think Milroe should be in that conversation still, Travis Hunter's certainly up there for me. He's doing stuff that we've never really seen a player do in college football. And his other point that Hunter made was, you've seen running backs have really, really good seasons. You've never seen somebody do what I'm doing. That is a good point. That's the point to argue. But the 95 receptions thing, I just thought it was funny because I'm like, okay, first of all, you're averaging 11.98 yards per catch. So if you had caught 95 passes, which you're trying to compare rushes to passes, which is just foolish, but let's go with this here. You'd be sitting at 1,200 yards, not that far ahead of Genty. And if anybody should be making that argument, which is flawed and terrible in the first place, but in my opinion, it should be Ryan Williams because that cat's leading the country in yards per catch. So if he had 95 catches right now, he'd had close to 2,500 yards. that's the time to make that argument. When you're averaging 11.98 yards per catch, which is way outside the top 100, you probably shouldn't be hyping up the fact that if you had 90 catches at this point, how many yards you would have, because it's really not that much more than Gianti as a runner.
Yeah, maybe he should say, "Hey, what if he played defense too?"
Yeah, that's what, if I was the Boise running back, that's exactly what I say. Hey, well, if they gave me time on defense, what do you think I'd do over there?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
because that's a good point.
Yeah, it's like when Charles Woodson won the Heisman, he won it over Peyton Manning, right? And he did like the interception, he did the Heisman pose. He blew up after that.
He did,
And I
yeah.
would have voted for Peyton Manning. I mean, I thought, as much as I didn't like Peyton Manning at the time, I thought he was the best player in the country. And I still do think he was the best player in the country, but he didn't get it. It almost felt like a little bit of the Bama fatigue with Peyton Manning. There was a Peyton Manning fatigue back then. So who knows? Part of it is having that moment.
Yes.
Having that like
or
like
two, moment or two.
Yeah, when Smitty went up and high pointed that touchdown against LSU, it was like, whoa, or Derrick Henry, training people, but he had the game against Georgia, and then jumping over dudes and just kind of like feeding him the rock. But like he just had those moments. Mark Ingram had those moments. Bryce Young had them, and other guys that have won it had it. So it's almost like you got to have those moments. And if Jalen Milroe is going to really be a contender and win it, he can't have any more South Carolina games. He's going to have those moments. And the Georgia game, we saw what he's capable of doing. When they're sending those blitzes at him, he's just got to get better at figuring out either I'm throwing the ball away faster, or I'm going to have some checkdowns that are going to allow me to get rid of it, burn them, I'll break one tackle, turn it into a touchdown. They'll stop blitzing.
Live to fight another day. And
Yeah.
that's not an exclusive problem to Jalen Milroe. You want to know who else had that problem? Tua Tagovailoa. And it almost cost him his career because he held onto the football too long, too much, trying to make a play. And that's what Jalen Milroe is trying to do a lot of the time. And he's just got to learn to accept when it's not there, live to fight another day. But when you talk about Milroe, and a lot of people probably heard me say that about me still putting Milroe very heavily in the Heisman conversation, and everybody saw how he played against South Carolina, and they probably don't want to agree with it. I'll say this. In SEC football history, there have been 3 quarterbacks who have run for more than 20 touchdowns or more, and that is Cam Newton in 2010. He had, I want to say, 20. Johnny Manziel in 2012. He had 21, and Tim Tebow had 23, I believe, in 2007. Right now, with what Jalen Milroe has 11 in 6 games, so he's averaging 1.83 touchdowns per game. If you give him just a 12-game regular season, he's going to exceed 20 rushing touchdowns. And then when you start stacking that on top of it, I mean, so that's first and foremost as far as an argument for him winning the Heisman or being in that Heisman conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But not only that, to understand just how impressive he has been on the ground as far as the rushing touchdowns, Derrick Henry, during his Heisman 2015 season, he had 28 rushing touchdowns. That is still an SEC record to this day. If you give Jalen Milroe 15 games like Derrick Henry got, currently Jalen Milroe is on pace for 27.5 rushing touchdowns. So Derrick Henry averaged 1.87 touchdowns per game during his Heisman season. Milroe, as a quarterback, is currently averaging 1.83. So what he's doing on the ground is absolutely absurd. Yeah. He's made strides as a passer. If he can have some of those Heisman moments, he can have some of those, help, elevate his team, get them some big wins. He can absolutely win the Heisman. He should be in that conversation. Mm-hmm. Not saying he should be the front runner right now. I still think he's kind of up and down. I don't think he's playing his best football. But anybody that wants to count this guy out after one subpar performance against South Carolina, I just don't think that's it's way too premature for that.
3 rivalry games left, and who knows what else has his number being called before this thing's all said and done. Guys, thank you for hanging out with us on Cover Crimson. You can get one of these right here for free when you do the annual subscription to covercrimson.com. Clint will be on there with the snap counts. We're building a lot of different stuff on the site, and we want you to be a part of it. Message board's always fun to cut it up with you guys as well. And our show's brought to you by MyBookie. Use the promo code next round to double your initial deposit at mybookie.ag. Take advantage of it. 2.5 right now. The spread, Alabama at Tennessee. Coker's, if you go with Coker's lock, he's kind of feeling like Vegas feels like it's a Bama win. I don't know. I think you take a road dog, but I haven't decided what the score is going to be either. We'll get there when we get there, but you guys can go and check it out as well. I hope the road dog, the home dog loses this time. That's my hope. But Clint Lamb, I'm Mick Gillispie. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.